Thank you.
No, and I'm not going to say a lot about John because his slides are great. It does. We brought you in to show you since the beginning of where you were here for Langley and what you've done and you know where you are today. And you guys are going to love the pictures because you're going to see a few of your buddies in there. But right now, John was a co-founder and former CEO of Atlanta-based SpaceWorks Enterprises. He retired as the CFO of SpaceWorks in 2022 and currently serves as the company's chairman of the board of directors. He has over 30 years of experience in aerospace sector, including positions in private consulting, large aerospace companies, academia, and also small businesses. So a wide variety of activities that he's been involved in. From an education standpoint, he is a PhD in aerospace engineering from GoPac, an MS in aeronautics and astronautics from Stanford University, and a BS in aerospace engineering from GoPac. Yay! So the fun fact, and we have his wife, Melinda, is here with him. So thank you for coming, Melinda. So fun fact, and then we like try to do a little fun fact. And my buddy Bobby, I can't see Bobby. There you go, buddy. Raise your hand. So everybody that doesn't know you, and John Cortez. Is John here? What's here?
I'm online.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sounds good. What do these three people have in common?
Hey.
No.
Hey.
Say, this one is not as. Did you say old? Is that what he said? Yeah. Not as old as some of us. Come on, guys. We should have done a Jeopardy question.
They have a high IQ.
NC State.
They are all members of the NC State University Aerospace Department's Hall of Fame. So how about, yay! And thank you, Doug, for sending that to me, because you know we love to do the fun facts for our presenters. So I didn't know if you knew that, if you knew these two, but with that, I say thank you for coming, and thank you for coming for your little vacation. And it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Can you all hear me okay? I'm going to move
Yes.
around a little bit. I'm going to use this mic, but it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Kathy. And when Doug Morris sent me an invitation to say, hey, could you come speak to the Langley Alumni Association? I said, Doug, I never really worked at Langley. And he said, you know, John, you're part of the family. You are part of the Langley community. And that is certainly true. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my history and how I got started, and then challenge you or encourage you to think a little bit about commercial space in a couple of minutes. But Langley to me is like coming home, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be speaking to you all today. I don't think it's anything I'm over exaggerating to say I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have had the career that I've had if it wasn't for people at Langley and for the center itself. So you all gave me a start. You've nurtured me along the way. We've stayed in contact in the various phases of my career, and I appreciate it. What I'd like to do a little bit is by way of warm up is to prove to you that I do belong here and I am part of the Langley community. And then I'll do that for a few slides, and then I'll get into what we're calling the new space revolution. I'm a space person, and I've tracked and been a part of the commercial space industry for most of my career. So we'll spend most of the talk talking about that. However, a little bit of background. I grew up in South Carolina. I'm the son of a college professor. My dad is a physicist and a computer scientist, and I grew up as a child of Apollo. And I imagine many of you here in the room also did. And when I grew up, I wanted to work at NASA. And so in the 60s and the early 70s, this is what I dreamed of doing. We watched Apollo on the news all the time. We watched the accomplishments, Apollo-Soyuz test program and the various landings on the moon. And then that began to transition to the space shuttle program. I'm showing here a couple of other images. So as a kid, I enjoyed science fiction. I enjoyed science fiction television. I enjoyed reading Tom Swift books and other things like that. And I was inspired by this kind of artwork. This is from Chelsea Boneso, both of this one in the middle and the one to the right. And I don't know if you've heard the analogy before, but there were three thought leaders in the space community at that time, or three that I like to talk about. One was Carl Sagan, one was Wernher von Braun, and the other was Gerard O'Neill. And you might have heard of at least a couple of those. Certainly you've heard of von Braun. Wernher von Braun associated with NASA. Von Braunians, people that subscribed to his philosophy, generally were folks that were favored the idea of a national space program that was worthy of a technological society. We as a society followed, and as NASA followed, the von Braun blueprint for a number of years. The space shuttle, the idea of a reusable shuttle that's shown in a different configuration in this image here, having orbiting space stations, and then evolving and eventually sending humans to the moon and on to Mars. That was von Braun's vision. Carl Sagan, mostly associated with, I tend to move. This is a comfortable spot. Thank you. Carl Sagan, associated with Cornell, also the Planetary Society. Don't know if any of you watched the original Cosmos series when Carl Sagan did the Cosmos series, but a person who believed in expanding human knowledge through robotic exploration. I usually associate Carl Sagan with the exploration of Mars and the outer planets, interstellar flight, all of his spaceship of the imagination, all of those exciting things that he dreamed of. I tended to find myself a little bit as an O'Neillian, Gerard O'Neill with Princeton Space Studies Institute. Gerard O'Neill was somebody that advocated for, let's send humans into space and let's live there. Let's develop space. Let's expect settlement. Let's expect commerce. Let's expect human activity that's not just exploration and not just science, but other kinds of businesses and manufacturing and resource utilization. And so folks that fall in that camp are generally O'Neillians. And so that's kind of my inspiration and aspiration. As Kathy said, I ended up going to North Carolina State. I grew up in South Carolina, but there is no aerospace engineering program in the state of South Carolina. There wasn't then, there is now at the University of South Carolina, but there wasn't. So I went to North Carolina State. I had a fantastic time when I was on campus. I lived on campus for 4 years. I majored in aerospace engineering. And one of the things that I discovered when I got on campus was that our professors in the Department of Aerospace Engineering had a great relationship with NASA Langley. And that was because there was a pipeline from North Carolina here to the Tidewater area for, and I know when we did the introduction, there are a number of Wolfpackers out in the crowd today. But we had some great relationships through Hassan Hassan and Fred DeJarnette, Jerry Wahlberg later, who was my academic advisor, and also Alan Wilhite. And Alan texted me and wished that he could be here today. But Alan Wilhite was one of those folks who was at Langley with an NC State background, instrumental in helping me get my start. When I, you see here in this particular picture, when I was between my sophomore and junior years, I had the opportunity to work at NASA Johnson Space Center as an intern, and so they put us on the consoles at midnight when all the astronauts were asleep, and we didn't have anything to do to really mess anything up. But we were big shot, fancy pants people that were talking to the FIDOs and the flight directors about people who were asleep mostly. But that was my first exposure to NASA as an organization. That would have been back in the day a Code M center, if that means anything to anybody, an operational center. And that's what they did. That's what they lived and dreamed. It was, when is this mission? When is the next mission? When is the one following that? My time at NASA Johnson was before Challenger. So it was actually the summer before Challenger. And so that was the heyday of the Space Shuttle program, or the early parts of the Space Shuttle program. However, I had the chance the following summer between my junior and senior years to come here to NASA Langley. Again, I credit a lot of that to Alan Wilhite for making that happen. I talked to my advisors at NC State and said, I really like advanced space transportation systems. I really like working on reusable vehicles or what's after shuttle? What do we do after shuttle? And we had a couple of programs here at Langley at that time, the HL20 program, which I didn't point to on my previous slide, the PLS program, but also AMLS and Shuttle 2 and some other BIMEs. That was Roger's thing, was BIMEs. So I was here at Langley in 1232 across the street as a young student. And you can see anybody that recognizes some of those kind of old computers or recognizes what the center looked like back in the day. I'm pretty sure I wasn't supposed to bring a camera on field, but I'm a student, and what are you really going to do? You're going to put me in jail. So this This picture in the lower left is taken kind of looking out the front door of 1232 toward the hypersonic tunnel complex. Some very classic cars. Don't tell me if you recognize yours in the parking lot out there, but maybe some of you would. I shared an office with Chris Cruz and Mark Cunningham and worked on a next generation space shuttle idea. When I got to Langley, I fell in love with the place. This is a fantastic place. It has, to me, a very academic, research, collegial warmth to Langley. I love coming here and watching the F-15s fly around. Now that's been updated, F-22s flying out there today. But it was a great place to work where the product of the work was research and research papers and contributions to the industry. And the group that I got a chance to work in, the vehicle analysis branch, and Doug is here from that, and Roger is here. Chuck now actually leads the directorate under which that falls currently. Kind of welcomed me in and made me a part of the team. All open doors. You could go and talk to anybody you needed to about anything you might be interested in, aerodynamics, propulsion, operations, trajectory optimization. And I learned quite a bit here, and it shaped me for the rest of my career. Some other names of folks that you might, I mentioned Mark before, Joe Reeder, who we've lost. Lance Bush was in my office too, and Chris Knapp. I apologize, Roger, I don't have a picture of you on this one. I have the next one. But these are just some folks that I took around the office. And Doug, you're not in this one either, and neither are you in the next one, which is suspicious. I had a great experience. Sam Massenberg, if anybody remembers Sam Massenberg in the Office of Education, was the one who started and created that program. I think this was the inaugural year. The 1986 year of summer students, or probably were, give or take, maybe about 50 of us. 2 of us lucky enough to be in the vehicle analysis branch, and that was really what helped jumpstart my career and what I do today. I had a second stint at VAB when I was working on my PhD. So I had a program that was similar to, it wasn't GIAFS, but if anybody knows the old GIAFS program with GW, it was similar to that, but it was with North Carolina State University and here at Langley. So I spent a couple of years, this was after I was married. Melinda and I lived over here in Yorkshire Downs and listened to wind tunnels and race cars a lot. So this is a branch circa that time. Roger, you are in this one. Doug, you and I are not in this picture for some reason. I'm sure we were doing something quite important at the time, studying operations or X-15 manpower data or something, but we're not in that picture. But hopefully you recognize some of the folks that are in there. And I know that Nancy was mentioned as someone we've lost quite recently, and so she's pictured here in this group of folks. Okay, so I did, Jerry Wahlberg was my advisor, and when I came back, I concentrated on multidisciplinary design optimization, or multidisciplinary analysis and optimization within advanced space systems. And I learned quite a bit from you folks here, and I'm grateful for that. Following that, I'd spent a little bit of time before I worked on my PhD. I worked at General Dynamics Space Systems Division in Huntsville, in and around Marshall. And when I went off to graduate school, I said, I'll be back in a couple of years. And that was the early 90s, and you probably know where this story is headed. And after I finished my PhD, I called up General Dynamics, and they're like, who are you? I want my job back. I want to come back. Well, General Dynamics had been bought by, the great consolidation, had been bought by Martin Marietta. Martin Marietta had merged with Lockheed Martin. So I was, in the space of 3 or 4 years, my company had changed hands. And there was a great downturn in the industry, at least on the space side, as we reaped the peace dividend and had a little bit of consolidation there. So again, Langley came to my rescue, and I had the opportunity to become a professor at North Carolina State. And in that arrangement, Langley, Howard Stone was the person, and maybe it was Larry Rowell, provided essentially half of my salary as a researcher to help with some projects here at VAB while I was also teaching. So I became a professor, and I spent 13 years or so in academia. And during that time, most of this is from my time at Georgia Tech, but I ran into some great people. And I specifically, even before I knew that JD was going to be here, I just specifically decided to brown nose with JD. and say that I had some great people that came through my programs. I had 8 PhD students. I didn't know if Dave Way would be here, but many of you might recognize Dave. This guy, Chirania AC, is now the chief technologist. And then some of you probably remember or would know of Ian Clark, now at JPL. So we had a great program, and I experienced what it was like to be a college professor, teaching a variety of classes, getting research. Again, Langley to me was a source of research dollars and a source of collaboration on a number of different projects that we worked in at NC State and at Georgia Tech. So thank you again. So I got the bug to become an entrepreneur. My grandfather had been an entrepreneur, and I thought, you know what, that looks kind of easy. I think I'll try that. And so I left a tenured position in academia to become a startup company. Now that's a risk, but it was one I am glad that I took. So my company is called SpaceWorks Enterprises. We're located in Atlanta. I got a couple of pictures of some serious people and some nuts that I've had the chance to work with over the years. And I recently kind of stepped back from that. The company is doing fine. It's still healthy and growing, and we're expanding into not only systems analysis and software, but also some flight hardware. So I've left that company in good hands, and I consider myself now to be semi-retired. So I get to do these kind of talks like this. All right, that is my background resume. But what I came here today to talk to you about was commercial space. Commercial space, and what I might occasionally refer to as new space. And what has changed. I've had the fortune to have that as the backdrop to most of my career. I just happen to overlap with that. What I consider a revolution in how space is conducted in the US and the world. So it's a little bit of a introduction to some of you, but I'm sure you have opinions. I'm sure you follow the news like everyone else, and you have your opinion as to whether or not you think this is the next great thing, or whether or not you think it's .com. And so that's the kind of teaser I want to put out there as I introduce this. Let me say as background, though, that I'm not naive enough to say that commercial space just started 10 or 15 years ago. Commercial space is forever intertwined with the development of government programs and human exploration programs. I'm showing back from the early 1960s a number of spacecraft, a number of satellites on this slide, and I want to highlight 2 of them in particular. Well, actually, I want to highlight 3 of them, considering where I am. This one, Echo, which was essentially a very large mylar balloon used to reflect signals over the horizon from the US or to Europe or elsewhere, had a significant NASA Langley contribution. This project was conceived of here at Mother Langley, was designed here, and was tested in eastern North Carolina. So this is essentially an early NASA Langley contribution to space communications. Space communications was the original commercial application for space. We do a lot of remote sensing, we do a lot of Earth observation, but being able to communicate television and by two-way conversation telephony over the horizon using active spacecraft was a goal. I want to point out here Telstar 1, 1962, was essentially funded by AT&T. AT&T, along with help from NASA and Bell Labs, created the first spacecraft for over-the-horizon communications. This was in an elliptical orbit, so it was not in the next orbit I'm going to talk about. It was in an orbit that dipped close to the Earth and then went high and went close like that, like an egg shape. And it was used to communicate President Kennedy, for example, had a phone call across the Atlantic Ocean using Telstar, launched in 1992. So very much a precursor to commercial use of space. Early Bird over there in 1965 was the first commercial spacecraft to exploit geostationary orbit. Geostationary orbit, envisioned by Arthur C. Clarke, is the one that essentially is, it has the same period of rotation that the Earth does, so 24 hours. And so 24 hours, so it appears to be stationary to us as observers on the Earth. They're very high, about 22,000 miles up, but the first geostationary commercial satellite, later renamed to Intelsat 1, was used to broadcast the 1964 Tokyo Olympics in real time, live from Tokyo back to the US. So commercial space has been around a while. And so forgive me sometimes if I say this happened yesterday or this happened a week ago. It's been here with us for a while, but there's still a sea change that's happened. When I grew up, this was what space looked like to me. When I was in high school and when I was in my early days in college, NASA represented that. So you have Apollo program, exploration of the moon, space shuttle. This is Space Shuttle Challenger accident from 1986. And then also reflight, return to flight with some deployments of satellites. And the country believed at that time that the space shuttle could become the workhorse for launch, both military and civil, but also commercial. Now that didn't happen. We had an ELV fleet as well in parallel to that. But this is kind of the world that I lived in before in the early 1990s. Well, today, if you read the news, or if you follow the press much or just follow the industry much, there's an explosion of things. I hate to use that word, but there's an explosion of things happening in space. And it doesn't seem like you can go a month before there's a new company that's done something, or a new organization or partnership that's done something that we consider remarkable in space. Now, maybe it's that you've launched the world's first disco ball in space. This is called the Humanity Star, launched by Peter Beck's organization a few years ago from Rocket Lab. Okay, maybe. Maybe it's commercial landers funded by NASA, commercial landers on the surface of the moon, the CLIPS program, and some of the recent successes that those folks have had at Intuitive Machines and Astrobotic and others. There maybe is the Blue Origin investment. I'm going to tease some of these out because I've got some more to say on them. But in the meantime, there is the backdrop of NASA accomplishments here on Mars and here with the first launch of SLS, Block 1. So a lot happening in space, a lot of diversity, a lot of people participating throughout different parts of the country or the world, a lot of young people excited about going into space careers. I was down at NC State last week, and they say that applications to the aerospace engineering program are rising year over year consistently as people want to go into this industry. They see something different out there today, and that's opportunity. Okay, so you should have come into this talk with a little bit of bias, and that's okay because I want to talk about that. So as folks in the industry, longtime members here at LAA in industry, what is this? What's happening out there? Do you see it as a boom, as a revolution that's here to stay? Or do you see it as a bust? Do you think, well, it's a lot like the dot-com industry, and I lived through that. And so I want to say, I see a lot of failures when I look out to the news and I see things on the news. I see a lot of company failures or mission failures. And so I'm going to present to you over the next few minutes some arguments. I'm going to try to remain neutral. And then at the end, we'll have some audience participation as to whether or not you're on the side that you believe it's here to stay or you believe it's a flash in the pan. So let's get started with that. Let's start here. Billionaires. Now, it's nice to have a billionaire interested in your business. It makes a difference. These folks, we are lucky in the United States to have people who have made wealth in some other industry, let's say that, and have decided to invest or make a difference in the space industry. Now, you've heard the joke before that how do you become a millionaire in the space business? You start by being a billionaire. Some folks I want to point out by name, most of these people you'll know already. Paul Allen, now passed away, was behind the Ansari X Prize. He advocated for common person participation in spaceflight. And I have some other slides to talk about suborbital space tourism coming up, but he was behind a lot of the creation of the Ansari X Prize and the winning entry in that which was a Virgin Galactic entry called, or pre-Virgin Galactic called Spaceship One. But he made his money in Microsoft and spent some of it in space. Don't know if you know who that guy is. Elon Musk, obviously associated with SpaceX, founded in 2000, the same year as my company was founded. So I think we're buds. Elon and I are tight. I did meet him once. Interesting fellow, quirky, but interesting fellow, very much a visionary. He entered the space industry in 2000 at a couple of conferences that I was at. And he came from software side. He came from a lot of people associated with PayPal or maybe Zip It, which is another tool that he created in software side. But he came and did things quite differently. I remember going to one of his receptions at a conference. I was at an AIAA conference, and Elon Musk had a chocolate fountain in the middle of his booth. And I'm like, wow, this is unusual, but really made a difference to say, I'm here from the outside and I'm going to play a role to play. And you probably know his trajectory. He's done a number of other things besides SpaceX now, but Starlink will come back up in my talk today. Tesla, the boring company, and maybe the director of government efficiency. Richard Branson, the rebel billionaire, our favorite Brit here, has created a couple of companies. One of them is called Virgin Galactic. I'll talk about that. The other was called Virgin Orbit. Virgin Orbit, another one of his companies in space. Virgin Orbit went bankrupt. Virgin Galactic is still operating, but I'll address some of its difficulties in a moment. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, of course, and also founder of Blue Origin. Blue Origin, privately held company, as is SpaceX. These are not publicly traded companies. Also a major player in what we see as the space landscape today. This gentleman you may not have heard of, Jeb McCaleb. He is a Bitcoin billionaire. And a couple of years ago, he founded a brand new space company that you may not have yet heard of, but you will. It's called VAST, V-A-S-T, VAST, located in Southern California. His ambition is to make artificial gravity space stations for private clients or visitors to attend and visit. So these are rotating artificial gravity space stations in low Earth orbit. So VAST is a up-and-coming organization. So the billionaires are fantastic. They lead the way. They get a lot of press. They put their money to work. They have long investment time horizons. And these are great contributors to the revolution I'm talking about today, but not exclusively so. There are a number of people that are non-billionaires who have made it their life's work to build companies, to build devices, to have breakthroughs in technologies. And I've just listed a few of them here and a few of logos. The list can be quite long, but you see someone here like Bob Zubrin, who's been an advocate for Mars exploration for a long, long time, or Peter Beck at Rocket Lab, who I just mentioned a moment ago, launching the Humanity Star. But Jason Andrews. So a number of people, when I go to conferences, have invested and taken a significant risk in their personal wealth to either raise money or spend money to build companies in space. And so today, there are hundreds of space companies in the US operating and working and trying to change the landscape. Supporting that has been private investment. The financial news, you see, it seems like weekly that some company has raised $50 million or $100 million to go do a thing that probably, Roger, you and I worked on 20 years ago. They're now doing that thing. It's like they read the paper maybe. The sled launch, for example, at Radian. So there has been a lot of money that has poured into the new space industry from private capital, whether it be venture capitalists or angels or even private equity funds. This particular source here that I acknowledge only goes to 2019 shows that cumulatively we've had almost $25 billion of private capital invested in the space economy for startup companies. That's over 500 companies that have been founded and started since the beginning of this chart, but it's accelerating. can see by the shape of this curve that money is continuing to flow in on a regular basis to the space industry. Let me give you a counterpoint. Does that make a difference? If I go back and look at, say, the last 10 years, 2015 to 2024, you can see in this part of the pie that there has been $58 billion over that period of time that's gone into private companies. At the same period of time, if you add just NASA's budget in the space industry, that would have represented about $219 billion, or 79% of the investment that's made. I have a footnote here in the lower left that says I'm not even considering DoD investments, DARPA, Air Force, Space Force, et cetera, which their space-focused investments are on the order of NASA's. So all of the money, all of the press, everything you read about on Wall Street is 20%, perhaps even as low as 10% of what's being invested in the space economy today. It's still very much a government-supported and very much a government priorities-driven market. I like launch vehicles. I've done a lot of work in launch vehicles. And when I grew up, this is not the picture you would have seen. You would have seen the space shuttle, and you would have seen Delta, Atlas, and Titan, probably, as the family of launch vehicles in the US at least. But that's changed significantly. It's changed significantly probably because of this one on the left. I'll show you a chart in a moment. The Falcon 9, which was one of the first rockets to achieve partial reusability. The booster flies back. You've probably seen it on TV. The booster flies back and lands on a pad and can be reused a number of times. Roger and Doug, not the way we envisioned it necessarily, but go Elon Musk, I guess. We always had vertical takeoff, horizontal landing concepts. His is vertical because of the synergies with Moon and Mars. Others in the middle, New Glenn, that's Blue Origin, Electron, that's Rocket Lab, Alpha, that's Firefly, Vulcan, that's United Launch Alliance, and Antares is Northrop Grumman, formerly Orbital Sciences, SLS is NASA Boeing, and then finally there's Starship. And we all like to watch what's happening on Starship. And if anybody saw it getting caught by the chopsticks recently, that was pretty amazing. So that should be online before long. Well, in fact, if I look at this chart, there are really more like 60 launch vehicles under development or recently under development, partial development in the world today. It's a huge number of launch vehicles. Do we need them? Is there a market for them? I don't know. If you build it, they will come? I don't know. Let me show you some data. This is over the last roughly about 25 years. The one I want to draw your attention to is the blue one here, which represents Falcon 9. This is the cumulative number of launches that have taken place worldwide over that period. The Falcon 9 in recent years goes up about here or so. In the last 5 or 6 years has become the US workhorse for launching. Now, there's a little button here. I don't have it clicked, but there's a little button from this dashboard that I picked that said exclude Starlink. In many ways, a lot of the launches of Falcon 9 are for the other part of Elon Musk's own company. So you might have to take that with a grain of salt, but still, over 100 launches in 1 year is pretty impressive for the Falcon 9. Worldwide market, you can see here for launches, but let me point out a counterpoint here. You see some of the ones here at the top are Russian or Chinese. Now, any sovereign nation operating at the peer countries level is going to maintain their own launch vehicle. I'll say something dramatic. I don't think US launch vehicles are going to get a significant share of rocket launches out of Russia or China. Probably not the green ones here or Europe as well. I think collectively we can say that there are sovereign reasons, military reasons to have your own launch vehicle. So how big is the market? Can you displace these people? Can you grow the market? I think that's what they're hoping. You probably have your opinions on that. Are we building things we don't need? some of the things I get to do in my sort of semi-retired life now is play in private investment. And I don't know if any of you are invested in the stock market, but one of the things that's changed in the last few years is, in addition to the traditional space companies we have always had, which are part of the military industrial complexes, the Boeings and the Northrops and the Lockheeds and the Raytheons. Nowadays, we have pure play space companies to invest in on the New York Stock Exchange and in NASDAQ and other places. You could go home today and go to your broker and say, buy me a certain number of shares of Rocket Lab, for example. I have another chart to complement this. And I don't know if any of you are so brave, but I think it would indicate your thoughts on this industry if you say you're invested in those or you're not invested in those. There have been, from an investment point of view, whether it be going public or being acquired, there have been a number of high-profile wins that people who invest in these things can point to and say, these things were wins in the space industry. And they include the Climate Corporation. It's $1 billion acquisition for Monsanto and later Bayer. Skybox. Skybox was a $500 million acquisition by Google for a company that had maybe 1 or 2 spacecraft at the time. Very small startup with Stanford MBAs. And then a number of them I'll point out that appear to be on positive trajectories. I do have a little caveat here that says I didn't give you investment advice based on this chart, right? Everybody agree? My opinions only. But there are some wins. But oh my gosh, there are some losses here. There are $1 billion losses as well. Most notable one I have here, number one, goes back a few years, but the Teledesic project with Craig McCall and Bill Gates lost over $1 billion in trying to create an internet from space. Hold that thought. Iridium, creating communication systems from space for telephony, telephone, et cetera. And I put version 1 here because most of you are familiar that Iridium came back out of bankruptcy and does still operate today with an Iridium Next network. That's an upgrade from its previous one. I mentioned Virgin Orbit. Virgin Orbit went bankrupt. It was it was the launching side of Richard Branson's empire. And a number of them, including some colleagues here recently, Reaction Engines, just went out of business. We track these kind of things in the stock market. These are all, think of them as relative changes. The vertical axis here is dollars per share, but they're not all on the same axis. But just think of them as relative differences. So these ones on the left in the center are things you could go out and buy today. You can buy them just as easily as you can buy Apple stock or Microsoft stock or NVIDIA stock today. And this is the performance that they've seen. Well, if I've invested a certain amount of money here and it's there, I consider that to be a win. These kind of things are interesting. AST Space Mobile is a company that's trying to create the ability to have cell phone conversation anywhere on the globe using a satellite relay. Rocket Lab is a launching company. Intuitive Machines does a number of things, but also associated with lunar landers. Redwire is a multi-aspect infrastructure space company. So you have these that have shapes that you're kind of happy with, but then you have those that have shapes that you're very much not happy with. So there are losers.
Yeah, these.
I want to touch a little bit on this one. Suborbital space tourism, something that we all thought was coming when the Ansari X Prize was won, maybe, how long has that been? 15 or more years ago. Is it here? Don't know. There are 2 companies promoting the idea that you can fly on a balloon to the edge of space, very high altitude, see the curvature of Earth, a gentle flight up, have some wine and cheese, a gentle glide back down. It's all very nice. Or there are a couple of companies that are promoting and executing, actually operating, rocket-based, acceleration-based, roller coaster rides to the edge of space and then back down again. That's Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin. these two were in that business and are now out of that business. Anybody know how many flights these guys have done this year? Yeah, it's about 2 or 3 each. In order to make those business cases close, you need like about 50 a year, and they're operating like 2 or 3 a year. Why? Well, it's got a little bit of a dark cloud over it. Prices have gone up. It now costs about $450,000 to buy a ticket on Spaceship Two. They had a fatal accident, of course, during testing that has dampened the market there. In the last couple of years, New Shepard had an accident that did not have any people on it during that flight. It was a cargo research mission, but they aborted the booster. So you might evaluate, see what you think about that. In space, the big talk are really these three, but maybe even those two, the top two. The Kuiper project from Amazon, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk don't really like each other that much. So they have this sort of rivalry, and whatever you can do, I can do. Yeah, okay. So I think it's good for us. But the idea of having internet in space, thousands and thousands and thousands of spacecraft in low Earth orbit. Is that contributing to debris? Contributing to technology advancement? Somewhere. Apple just invested a lot of money into Globalstar recently so that we can all call SOS on our watches if we fall over at Yosemite. Space station research. I was an advocate for this when the space station was first being built. It's going to be an opportunity to do incredible amounts of research on human science, human factors, technology. There have been a few things that have happened on the space station commercially, but if you look at the comparison of the budget, the same story I was making before. To operate the space station with resupplies, maintenance, service, crew, that budget costs NASA about $3 billion a year. The national lab budget's maybe $15 million for commercial research. So I've made some points, introduced a couple aspects of the industry: financial, suborbital, launch, internet in space. I did fail to point out on the internet in space that, at least me, I live in rural North Carolina now. I can get gigabit speeds for internet using fiber that the US government has lightly run to my house. Thank you very much. But if I bought Starlink, I'd be lucky to get 100 megabits per second for about $120 a month. It's great. Maybe it will get better over time, but I have a question on that. So what do you think? Boom or bust? Start with an easy question, just show of hands. If you suddenly got $500,000 from a lottery or whatever, would you be the type of person who would spend that on a suborbital space tourism mission? Anybody? Oh, you people. Live a little, right? At your home, would you abandon your cable or DSL or your fiber and subscribe to a satellite-based internet service that gave you 100 megabit per second for $120? Anybody live in a place that you would do that? Just one. I talked about somebody like Wernher von Braun wanting to go to Mars. And then I talked about Gerard O'Neill and the idea of settlement. I've been kind of an advocate of one-way trips to Mars. You go there to stay. Would anybody go, if you were selected, would anybody go to Mars one way if it was free? Spend the rest of your days on Mars? Elon Musk wants to do that. Maybe we should let him. Okay, so what do you think? Knowing what you came into the room with and knowing some of the facts that I put up here, some of the data, how many of you think it's a boom? It's here to stay? The revolution, not going back? How many of you tend to think .com been a kind of a bust? If it wasn't for the government, none of this would have happened. Okay, well, more of you are optimistic. That's good. My own perspective is this: the billionaires and their leadership are a fantastic advantage, and we should be appreciative of them. But ultimately, we have to be able to sustain it after they lose interest or expire. The business plans, all of the startups we see, you have to have a business plan. You have to be able to make revenue. You're seeing a lot of companies go under now because they promised to get asteroid dust and bring it back and sell it. Didn't happen. I'm somebody that says we need to appreciate the role the U.S. government has played and continue to play in the commercial space revolution. Elon Musk is quick to point out on the Falcon 1 rocket that he was in a period that NASA could make him or break him at that time, and came through with enough money to fund a couple more flights of Falcon 1. And without that, we wouldn't have SpaceX, we wouldn't have Falcon 9, we wouldn't have Starship. So I like the idea of a public-private partnership where the government continues to play a role. Well, whatever you think of the boom or bust, I think that there are changes in the space industry. It's not your father's or your grandfather's space industry anymore. Change is underway, so buckle up. And I'm happy to take any questions. Kathy, I know we're almost out of time, but yes, sir.
This is a question from online. Who do you think will land on Mars first?
Well, that's usually a provocative question. I'll answer it anyway, because the question generally is SpaceX or a government organization, and I think SpaceX. And it specifically means humans, I think, in the context is how I interpret that. I think right. SpaceX is hard to bet against. They've done some remarkable things. Yes, sir.
When?
Oh, when? It's been said that as a society, we overestimate what we can do in 5 years, but we underestimate what we can do in 50. I think the answer is 10 to 15. Yes, sir.
Spacecraft from running into one another and creating a...
Yeah, the Kessler syndrome. Yeah, there are. And one of the most important ones, and yes, there is coordination and traffic management internationally and domestically. What you're referring to is called the Kessler syndrome, which is, if you saw that movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock, that's the whole thing. And everything becomes a wasteland because of that. But one of the things we've done internationally is put a moratorium on anti-satellite weapons testing in space. So the number of fragments that are produced in an ASAT test is tens of thousands, and they stay a long time. And so we've signed a number of international agreements to stop doing that. The U.S. hasn't done it in many, many years. China and Russia are have been most recently the culprits. Sure.
Yes, there seems to be some boom or bust going on in old space, like particularly Boeing. So do you think some of the old space companies might go under, and that will help the new space companies?
It's a good question. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was primarily about Boeing, but I can go ahead and talk a little bit about the United Launch Alliance too, which is half Boeing, right? The rumors in the last few weeks have been that Boeing is trying to sell their space business. Well, if you're following the aerospace sector, you know that Boeing is in financial trouble over a lot of issues, but the 737 MAXs really put a damper on their cash flow. So there was some thought that they would sell the space business, which would include elements of the space station, it would include their satellite manufacturing business. And I don't know if that's going to happen. In some ways, I think Boeing is one of those sort of automobile industry kind of issues with the U.S. government. It's like too big to fail. Like, what should the government do to keep them from collapsing? I think it's got too much of an influence on our balance of trade internationally to let that happen. Now, could they spin off the space business? Probably. Could some mid-tier buy that? Maybe. The rumor is that on ULA that there are a couple of offers being made there, but one of them from Sierra Nevada. So ULA, United Launch Alliance, with the Vulcan Centaur is potentially going to be sold too to generate cash for Boeing. Can it help the new space industry? Yeah, I think churn is good. Yeah. Well, I'm over time, but I wanted to thank you again, and I do appreciate again all of the influence that you folks and this center had on me as a young person and a mid-career person. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you very much.